The first thing Diane Voss said when she saw my driveway was, "That cannot possibly be approved." She said it with the confidence of a woman who had spent 7 years turning personal preference into committee language. She was standing at the curb in a cream blazer, sunglasses perched on top of her head, one hand gripping a violation notice like it was a courtroom exhibit, and the other pointing at 80 feet of interlocking concrete pavers arranged in a full rainbow sweep from the sidewalk to my garage. Behind her, 3 neighbors had slowed their morning walks to the speed people use when pretending not to watch a minor public disaster. In front of her, my contractor was kneeling beside the edge restraint with a rubber mallet in one hand and the expression of a man who had just realized he was being asked to defend color theory before breakfast. "It is approved," I said. Diane did not look at me. She looked at the driveway. That was fair. The driveway was difficult to ignore. It began at the street with 2 neat charcoal borders, which I had chosen because I am not an animal. Inside those borders, the pavers moved from deep red to clay orange to gold, then into green, blue, and violet in broad diagonal bands. Not painted bands, not chalk, not some weekend craft project that would wash into the storm drain after the first rain. Actual concrete pavers, 4 inches thick, compacted base, polymeric sand, edge restraints, manufacturer spec sheet, load rating. Everything a driveway needed to be, except emotionally beige. Marco Bell, my contractor, tapped the mallet against his boot and said, "It is not paint, ma'am." Diane's eyes narrowed. "I can see that." "Then I am not sure why your notice says decorative paint." That was when I liked Marco. Not because he was on my side. Contractors are not on your side. Contractors are on the side of getting paid and not having a board president interrupt a compaction schedule. But Marco had a useful habit of saying exactly what a thing was, and Diane had built half her authority on calling things what they were not. "It is a driveway treatment," Diane said. "It is a driveway," Marco said. "A non-conforming driveway." Marco looked down at the pavers, then at the printed approval packet clipped to his workboard. "I installed approved interlocking concrete pavers from the Fairview Estates architectural packet. Same product line, same thickness, same base detail, same edge spec." Diane finally turned to me. "Nolan," she said, in the voice people use when they are about to explain your own property to you, "you know perfectly well this is not what the association intended." That was an interesting sentence. Not what the association intended. Homeowners associations love intentions when the written rule stops helping them. Intentions are soft. Intentions stretch. Intentions can fit into any sentence where the actual document has become inconvenient. I reached into the folder under my arm and pulled out the architectural approval form. "That may be true," I said, "but this is what the association approved." Diane stared at the page. The top right corner had a green stamp from the portal. Approved. The kind of word that looks harmless until it is sitting between an angry board president and a rainbow driveway. The funny part is that I had not set out to build the loudest compliant surface in Fairview Estates. At first, I was trying to be boring. 2 months earlier, my driveway was the kind of old concrete every neighborhood has, but no one notices until someone decides they need a campaign issue. It had hairline cracks near the apron, a faded patch where the previous owner had parked a leaking pickup, and a low spot that held water for about 30 minutes after a hard rain. It was not beautiful. It was also not a public emergency. But Fairview Estates had recently formed what Diane called the Curb Appeal Renewal Initiative, which was a phrase that sounded like a grant program and behaved like a flashlight shined into people's garages. The initiative began with mailboxes, then shutters, then a week where everyone received a reminder that trash cans should not be visible from the street, as if raccoons were reading the bylaws and losing respect for us. I survived all of that. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, I came home from work and found a peach-colored notice taped to my front door. Fairview loved peach paper. Diane said white paper looked too governmental. I had never understood why the problem with HOA enforcement was that it looked too official, but Diane had strong feelings about stationery. The notice said, "Driveway surface has deteriorated beyond acceptable visual standards. Owner must repair, resurface, or replace affected surface within 30 days. Continued non-compliance may result in daily fines." It included 3 photos of my driveway. One showed the low spot after rain, which made the entire driveway look like it was considering becoming a pond. One showed the hairline cracks near the apron. One showed the oil stain, cropped so tightly that it looked like a satellite image of a burned field. I read the notice twice, then stood in the driveway and looked at the actual concrete. It looked tired. I also looked tired, but no one had taped a peach notice to my forehead. Claire came home 10 minutes later, carrying groceries in one hand and her laptop bag in the other. She read the notice, looked at the driveway, and said, "How expensive is this going to be?" That is why I married Claire. She always skips the emotional theater and walks straight to the invoice. "Depends on what they mean by repair," I said. "They mean money." "Yes, but there are categories of money." She gave me the look. The look meant she had seen me discover categories before. Categories had once led to a 4-hour debate with our internet provider about whether a service interruption was technically an outage or a scheduled maintenance event no one had scheduled. I won that argument. We still changed providers. "Nolan," she said, "please do not make this weird." "I am going to ask for the approved materials." That is already the first step toward weird. She was not wrong. I opened the HOA portal that evening and sent the simplest message I could manage. "Please provide the current approved driveway repair, resurfacing, or replacement materials referenced by the notice dated April 14th. No adjectives, no sarcasm, no mention of peach paper. Diane responded the next morning at 7:12. "Attached, please find the current architectural surface standards for driveways, walkways, and visible hardscape areas. Owners are expected to maintain consistency with approved community materials and visual character." Expected, consistency, visual character. Those are words that wear loafers without socks. The attachment was a 9-page PDF. I printed it because screens make people careless. Paper slows you down. Paper lets you underline the word that later ruins someone's afternoon. The driveway section was less dramatic than Diane's email. It listed permitted surfaces: poured concrete, stamped concrete, broom finish concrete, exposed aggregate with prior approval, and interlocking concrete pavers from approved manufacturer lines. It specified minimum paver thickness for driveways, base depth, edge restraint requirements, slope, drainage, and maintenance. Then came the color page. Approved hardscape palette, clay red, autumn brick, sandstone, moss, slate blue, charcoal, violet ash. I read the list once, then I read it again. Then I leaned back in my chair and made the small mistake every HOA should fear. I asked myself what the document actually said. It said approved palette. It did not say one color. It did not say earth tone only. It did not say pavers must be arranged in a uniform field. It did not say accent colors were limited by percentage, which was the sort of thing an architect would have written if an architect had been allowed near this document without Diane standing behind him with a highlighter. It said approved manufacturer lines and approved colors. All of the colors were approved. I did not immediately decide to build a rainbow driveway. That would make me sound less reasonable than I was. What I did first was look for the trap. There is usually a trap. HOA documents are built like old sheds. You open one door and find 3 tools, a spider, and another door someone painted shut in 1998. So I searched for single, uniform, monochrome, pattern, decorative, accent, and mosaic. Nothing. I searched the board minutes for the last 3 years and found the vote approving the paver pallet. The discussion was about expanding surface options because poured concrete had become expensive and several driveways were cracking from age. Diane had chaired the meeting. Ruth Calder, the treasurer, had asked whether multiple colors were included because the clubhouse walkway used a mixed paver blend. Diane had answered, according to the minutes, the palette reflects all approved hardscape options. That sentence had been sitting there for 3 years, waiting politely for someone to make it inconvenient. The clubhouse walkway was my next stop. I walked over after dinner with my phone and took photos. The path from the clubhouse to the pool gate used 3 paver colors in a random blend: sandstone, autumn brick, and charcoal. It was not a rainbow. It was the kind of tasteful mixed pattern people call warm transitional when they are trying to sell patio furniture. But it mattered. The association had already accepted mixed approved colors in a visible common area. I came home and found Claire at the kitchen island, sorting mail. "I know that face," she said. "What face?" "The face you made when the cable company used the phrase customer experience adjustment." I put the printed packet on the counter. The approved paver palette includes 7 colors. "Wonderful. The rule does not say I have to choose one." She stopped sorting mail. "Nolan, I have not done anything. You have mentally done something." That was also true. I showed her the packet. I showed her the minutes. I showed her the clubhouse walkway photos. Claire read everything because Claire is cautious, not uninterested. She tapped the color page with one fingernail. "This is a loophole. This is a material standard. This is a loophole wearing a hard hat." "Possibly. How colorful are you thinking?" I did not answer quickly enough. She closed her eyes. "Nolan, I am thinking of a restrained spectrum. Those words have never belonged together." The next day I called 3 contractors. The first said he did not do HOA fights. I had not used the word fight, which told me he had experience. The second tried to sell me stamped concrete after I said pavers 4 times. The third was Marco Bell. Marco arrived in a white truck with Bell Hardscape printed on the side and a coffee cup wedged into the dashboard like it had structural importance. He walked the driveway without talking for almost 2 minutes. He crouched at the low spot, scraped the crack near the apron with a screwdriver, and looked at the slope toward the street. "You can replace this with pavers," he said. "Good. It will not be cheap." I assumed. "It will not be quick." Also assumed. "And if your HOA is already mad about a tired driveway, they are going to be very awake if you install 7 colors." I handed him the printed packet. He read the paver section, then the color list, then the board minutes. He did not smile, which I appreciated. A smiling contractor can mean several things, most of them expensive. Technically, he said, these are approved colors. Technically is my favorite kind of correct. Do not say that at the meeting. Noted. Marco flipped back to the installation requirements. They require 80mm pavers for driveways, 6 inches compacted aggregate base, edge restraint, polymeric sand, drainage maintained to street. That is normal. The pattern is not a structural issue. Could it be a tasteful pattern? He looked at me. Tasteful to whom? That was the real question, of course. We spent an hour drawing options on graph paper. A full rainbow stripe would have looked like a theme park had surrendered in my front yard. A random blend would not have made the point. Marco suggested a diagonal band pattern with charcoal borders and a narrow neutral apron at the street to keep the transition clean. Professional, visible, impossible to describe as accidental. I asked for a formal quote and a layout sheet. Marco wrote, "Approved color palette per owner-provided HOA standard" in the description. I liked him even more after that. Then I submitted the ARC form. Project description: remove deteriorated concrete driveway and replace with approved interlocking concrete pavers from attached Fairview Estates hardscape palette, installed per contractor layout and association base/edge specifications. Attachments: HOA paver standard, approved color palette, contractor quote, layout drawing, manufacturer spec sheet, drainage note. I did not write rainbow. I also did not hide the colors. The layout drawing was attached. The palette was attached. The contractor quote referenced the colors. I had learned long ago that being sneaky gives petty people oxygen. Being complete starves them. The portal stamped the submission received at 9:42 a.m. 2 days later, it stamped it approved. I stared at the green word for a long time. Approved. There are moments when life hands you a clean tool. The mistake is waving it around immediately. I printed the approval, saved a PDF copy, emailed it to myself, and put a hard copy in a folder labeled Driveway Replacement. Claire watched me slide it into a plastic sleeve. That folder looks serious. It is a serious folder. Are you happy? I am cautiously organized. That is worse. Marco scheduled the job for the first week of May. The old concrete came out on a Monday morning. Diane appeared at 8:17 with a travel mug and the expression of someone who had smelled disobedience from across the cul-de-sac. She stood on the sidewalk while Marco's crew saw-cut the apron and broke the slabs into manageable pieces. "I am pleased to see you are addressing the violation," she said. "I received the approval," I said. "Good. Once the new surface is in, we can put this behind us." That was the first time I realized she had not opened the attachments. Not really. She had seen driveway replacement. She had seen approved pavers. She had seen a form move from one status to another. In her mind, that meant gray. Maybe tan. Maybe the kind of muted brick color used at medical office entrances. She had not imagined color as a plural noun. The pallets arrived Tuesday. I will say this for paver manufacturers: they do not name colors like normal people. Red cannot simply be red. It must be heritage clay. Yellow becomes desert sun. Green becomes juniper wash, even if no juniper would recognize it in court. The blue was called harbor slate, which sounded like a law firm with a boat. Marco had the pallets lined up in the driveway footprint like evidence. Red, orange, gold, green, blue, violet, charcoal. Edwin Price, my neighbor across the street, stopped at the mailbox with his dog and stared. "Are those all for your driveway?" "Apparently," Did the HOA approve that? That is the question everyone seems to enjoy asking. He laughed, then looked down at his own walkway, which had a crack wide enough to keep spare change. They sent me a notice last month, he said. Uneven front path. I put it in a drawer. Drawers are where HOA notices go to become fines. That sounds like something my wife would say. Your wife sounds practical. Terrifyingly. He crossed the street and asked Marco a few questions about paver thickness. That mattered later, though none of us knew it yet. By Wednesday afternoon, the driveway had stopped being a construction site and started becoming an accusation. The charcoal border went in first, then the red diagonal field, then orange, gold, green. Each band was clean, measured, and locked into the next. The crew worked with string lines and a laser level, which gave the entire process a calm, professional dignity that made the result funnier. It is one thing to make something loud. It is another thing to make something loud with tolerances. Claire came home early and stood beside me at the curb. "It is less chaotic than I feared," she said. "Thank you." That was not permission to become impossible. "Understood." It is still very, very colorful. "Also understood." Diane drove by at 4:06. She did not stop. She slowed. Her SUV rolled past at a speed generally reserved for funeral processions and people reading house numbers they already know. She looked at the red band, then the orange, then the green already waiting on the pallet. Her mouth opened slightly. By Thursday, the blue and violet were in. The driveway was no longer a driveway in the emotional sense. It was a municipal improvement project that had eaten a paint sample book. It was a crosswalk designed by someone who believed traffic calming should have self-esteem. It was also level, drained properly, and looked expensive enough that even people who hated it had to hate it carefully. Marco ran the compactor over the surface in slow passes. The machine buzzed across the pavers with a heavy, practical sound that made the whole thing feel final. Polymeric sand settled into the joints. The charcoal borders framed the color so sharply that the driveway looked less like a prank and more like a decision. That was when Diane arrived with the notice. She did not wait for the final sweep. "This is unacceptable," she said. Marco turned off the compactor. The silence after a construction machine stops is a special kind of silence. It makes every sentence feel more expensive. "Good morning, Diane," I said. "Do not good morning me, Nolan. What is this?" "A driveway." "It is a rainbow." "It is also a driveway." "You were approved for replacement." "Correct." "With pavers." "Correct." "Not this." I looked at the surface. "This is pavers." She held up the notice. "This is a non-uniform decorative driveway treatment." Marco leaned on the compactor handle. "The treatment is the paver surface. The pattern is part of the layout." Diane looked at him as if he had spoken in a dialect used only by men who own knee pads. "Are you the installer?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then you should know this community has standards." "I installed the standards you gave him." That sentence hung in the air. Edwin had returned with his dog. Mrs. Patel from 2 doors down had paused with a watering can. A delivery driver slowed at the curb and took longer than necessary to confirm the package was from my house. Diane saw the audience forming and lowered her voice. "Nolan, this is not the place. My driveway is the place under discussion. The board will review this. Please include the approval packet." She smiled then. It was a small administrative smile, the kind that comes out when someone believes process belongs to them. We will include what is relevant. That was the second mistake. The first was approving the form. The second was teaching me the shape of the next folder. The violation arrived in the portal at 6:38 that evening. Non-uniform decorative driveway treatment inconsistent with community visual harmony. Owner must restore surface to approved uniform appearance within 14 days. Visual harmony. I read the phrase to Claire. She was making tea. She stopped with the kettle in midair. Is that a rule? No. Is that a phrase Diane made up because she hates your driveway? That is my current interpretation. Our driveway. Excuse me? She hates our driveway. I nodded solemnly. Shared assets, shared enemies. Claire tried not to smile and failed a little. The temptation was to reply immediately. That is what the small, angry part of your brain wants. It wants to type with both thumbs in the force of a person who knows the word attached is about to do violence. I did not. Instead, I printed the violation and put it in the folder. Then I printed the approval again and put that behind it. Then I added the paver packet, color palette, Marco's quote, the layout sheet, the portal timestamps, and the clubhouse walkway photos. The next morning I walked back to the clubhouse and took better photos. Wide shots, close shots, shots showing the mixed paver colors against the building. I did not need the walkway to be identical. I needed it to be mixed approved pavers in a visible common area. Selective enforcement does not require twins. It requires cousins standing close enough at a family reunion. Ruth Calder was there when I took the photos. Ruth was the HOA treasurer, which meant she understood numbers and had learned to distrust adjectives. She was unlocking the pool gate for a maintenance company when she saw me, crouching by the walkway. "Documenting us?" she asked. "Documenting pavers." "That sounds less threatening." "It may not be." She looked at the walkway, then at the folder under my arm. Ruth wore reading glasses on a chain and had the calm face of someone who had survived budget season without raising her voice. "Is this about your driveway?" "Diane says it violates visual harmony." Ruth closed her eyes for 1 second. "That is not a standard." "I noticed." She opened the gate and said, "Send the packet before the hearing. The whole packet." That told me 2 things. First, Ruth had not seen the whole packet. Second, Diane had probably hoped no one else would. Marco sent his installation statement that afternoon. It was beautifully boring. Bell Hardscape confirms driveway replacement at 118 Briar Glen Court. Was installed using 80mm interlocking concrete pavers from the manufacturer line referenced in the Fairview Estates hardscape standard. Installation includes compacted aggregate base, edge restraints, polymeric joint sand, and maintained drainage slope to street. All paver colors used are represented in the attached owner-provided approved palette. No poetry, no outrage. Just the sort of sentence that makes a bad argument sit down. I asked Marco if he would be willing to attend the hearing. He was standing by the tailgate of his truck, wiping polymeric sand dust off his hands with a towel that had long ago stopped pretending to be white. "I charge for meetings," he said. "Reasonable. And I do not argue with board presidents." Also reasonable. "I will answer factual questions about the installation." That is all I need. "Then send me the agenda when you get it." He paused, looked back at the driveway, and added, "For what it is worth, this is not the weirdest thing I have installed." Should I ask? No. That is another thing I appreciated about Marco. He understood boundaries. The agenda arrived the next morning. The subject line said, Compliance Review, 118 Briar Glen Court. The body of the email said the board would review the non-conforming driveway appearance and owner response. It did not say approved pavers. It did not say ARC form. It did not say mixed common area walkway. Diane's emails had a talent for walking around the most useful nouns. I forwarded it to Marco. Then I printed it. The folder was becoming thick enough to make a soft thud when set on the table. Claire heard it from the dining room and looked up from her laptop. How many pages is that now? 27, including duplicates. You printed duplicates? One working copy, one clean copy. Of course. The clean copy is for people who pretend they did not receive the working copy. She looked at me for a long second. That is either paranoid or experienced. The line is thinner than people think. The next few days settled into that strange period before an HOA hearing when nothing official is happening, but everyone behaves as if the air has paperwork in it. Diane did not speak to me. She did speak to other people because pieces of her version of the story drifted back to us in the harmless way neighborhood gossip pretends to be weather. Mrs. Patel heard that I had installed decorative flooring in a driveway. Edwin heard that I had tricked the approval system. Claire heard from Linda that Diane had described the pavers as a theme surface, which made Claire ask whether our driveway now had a season pass. I did not correct any of it publicly. Not yet. There is a kind of argument that wants you to start answering rumors one by one. That is how it eats your week. You correct the flooring comment, then the trick comment, then the theme surface comment, and by the end, you have become the person sending a 9-paragraph email about pavers to people who were only trying to walk their dog. So I waited for the room where the decision would be made. While I waited, I checked my own weak spots. That is the part people skip when they are sure they are right. They build a beautiful argument and never inspect the foundation. I read the approval again to see whether Diane could claim the layout drawing was unclear. It was not artistic, but it showed bands. I read Marco's quote to see whether color had been hidden in a line item. It had not. I read the pallet to see whether any paver was from a similar but unapproved line. Marco confirmed all 7 colors were from the same manufacturer family referenced in the standard. Then I checked money. If someone at the hearing asked why a normal homeowner would spend that much to make a point, I needed an answer that was not because I wanted to bother Diane, even though that answer had a certain honesty. The real answer was that our old driveway needed replacement anyway. The low spot had started to widen. The oil stain was permanent. The concrete near the apron had begun to chip in a way that would only become more expensive later. The paver option cost more than a basic gray resurfacing, but it also solved the drainage issue and could be repaired block by block if needed. The rainbow was the visible part. The replacement was still real. I added the contractor's cost breakdown to the folder. Demolition, base prep, pavers, labor, edging, joint sand, disposal. I highlighted nothing. Highlighting is useful for yourself and suspicious for everyone else. It tells people where to look before they trust you. I wanted the packet to feel complete, not coached. On Sunday, Edwin knocked on the garage door while I was sorting documents on a folding table. Linda says I should not wait for my walkway to become a fine, he said. Linda is right. She usually is. It is a burden. He had brought his own notice. Same peach paper. Same phrase. Visible walking surface deterioration. His deadline was later than mine had been, but not by much. Can I see what they sent you? He asked. I gave him the packet without the hearing notes. He read slowly. Edwin was the kind of man who moved through documents like he was crossing a creek, testing each stone before putting weight on it. So they listed the colors, he said. Yes. And they approved your form. Yes. And now they are saying they did not mean it. In more elegant language. He looked at the driveway through the open garage door. It is not what I would have chosen. Most people open with that. But I can see the work. It is not sloppy. That may be the nicest review the driveway gets this week. He folded the packet carefully. If they can do that to you after approval, they can do it to anyone. That was when I knew Edwin would attend. Not because he loved the rainbow, because he understood the trap. I uploaded my response the next morning. Please identify the specific written standard requiring a single-color driveway surface or prohibiting patterns using approved paver colors. Attached are the ARC approval, approved pallet, contractor installation statement, and photos of association common area mixed pavers. Then I waited. Waiting is not passive when the other side needs your impatience. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday at 6 p.m. in the clubhouse. Fairview called it a compliance review, which is what HOAs say when "we are mad at your driveway" feels too honest for an agenda. By then, the driveway had become neighborhood weather. People did not always comment directly. They slowed. They tilted their heads. Children liked it immediately, because children have not yet been trained to fear saturation. A teenager on a bike called it the legal Rainbow Road, which I pretended not to enjoy. Mrs. Patel said it made the street easier to describe to delivery drivers. Edwin stood at the end of his cracked walkway one morning and said, "If you get away with this, my wife is going to make me read things." "My condolences," I said. Diane did not speak to me for 6 days. That was her right and my vacation. The compliance review began with Diane placing 3 photos of my driveway on the table. They were printed in color, which felt like a strategic error. The rainbow looked excellent under fluorescent lights. Diane had cropped the photos tightly so the charcoal border was mostly missing, and the surface looked more chaotic than it did in person. Ruth sat at the end of the table with a laptop. 2 other board members sat between her and Diane. Edwin sat in the audience with his wife, Linda. Claire sat next to me and had brought a pen, which meant she expected nonsense. Diane opened with a statement about community character. I let her finish. That is important. If you interrupt a person while they are building the wrong bridge, they may stop before they reach the weak part. She said the driveway created a disruptive visual field. She said it was inconsistent with surrounding homes. She said the approval had been for pavers, not for an art installation. She said the ARC could not reasonably be expected to anticipate every possible misuse of approved materials. Misuse. That was the word she chose. When she finished, Ruth asked whether my response packet had been distributed to the board. Diane said relevant portions were summarized. Claire wrote something on her notepad. I did not look, but I knew the note was not flattering. Ruth's expression did not change. I would like the full packet. Diane hesitated. It is lengthy. It is 11 pages, Ruth said. That was my favorite sentence of the evening. The packet was distributed. Paper moved around the table. There is a sound paper makes when people who expected a simple vote realize the paper has brought friends. It is a soft, shuffling discomfort. Ruth looked first at the approval, then the pallet, then Marco's statement, then the clubhouse walkway photos. Diane, she said, Where in the standard does it require a single color? Diane folded her hands. The expectation of uniformity is implicit. Where is it written? The entire architectural framework is based on visual consistency. Where is the single color requirement written? Diane looked at the other board members. One of them, a man named Paul who mostly handled landscaping bids, suddenly became fascinated by his water bottle. It may not use those exact words, Diane said. Does it use any words that prohibit a pattern made from approved colors? Silence is not always empty. Sometimes it is a document answering on behalf of everyone. I waited. Ruth turned to Marco's statement. The installation meets the physical requirements? I said, that is the contractor's statement, yes. And this is the same manufacturer line listed in our standard? Yes. And these colors are all on the approved pallet? Yes. Diane leaned forward. The issue is not whether each individual block exists somewhere on a pallet. The issue is the total visual effect. That was the best argument she had left, and to be honest, it was not silly. A board can regulate appearance if the documents give it authority. The problem was not that she disliked the effect. The problem was that she had approved the ingredients, approved the form, and then tried to invent the missing limit afterward. I said, if the board wants future driveways to use one color, it can write that. I would probably have complained less if the rule had said that before I spent money. But it did not say that when I applied. Paul cleared his throat. How much did this cost? Enough that I read the approval twice. Claire pressed her lips together. Edwin made a small sound that was almost a laugh. I gave the actual number because jokes do not pay invoices. The installation was more expensive than gray concrete patching, and less expensive than the number Diane's face suggested. I explained that we had removed the failed slab, corrected the low spot, installed a proper base, and improved drainage to the street. The color was the loud part. It was not the costly part. That distinction mattered. People forgive a joke more easily when it is not hiding bad workmanship. Then Edwin raised his hand. Diane looked pained. This is a compliance review for 118 Briar Glen. Ruth said, let him ask. Edwin stood. He was not a dramatic man. He had the careful posture of someone whose knees had opinions. He held up his own peach notice. I received a walkway notice last month, he said. Same packet. If I use approved pavers from the same pallet, will I be fined if my wife chooses more than one color? That question did more than my folder could have done alone. My folder made the board uncomfortable. Edwin made it practical. Because now the issue was not Nolan Mercer being difficult. It was whether every homeowner with old concrete had to guess Diane's unwritten preferences before spending thousands of dollars. Ruth looked at Diane. Diane looked at the packet. Paul looked relieved not to be the next driveway. The board did not vote immediately. Real life rarely gives you the clean slam of a gavel at the perfect second. They went into discussion. They used phrases like clarify guidance, avoid future ambiguity, preserve community standards, and respect approved submissions. Those phrases are not exciting, but they are the sound of a board backing away from a bad position without wanting to call it a retreat. Before the vote, Paul asked Marco one last question. If the owner had used the same colors in a random blend, would the driveway function differently? Marco shook his head. No. Pattern does not change the base. Pattern does not change compaction. Pattern does not change edge restraint. The only thing it changes is what you see. That answer was almost too clean. Diane tried to recover. But appearance is exactly what we regulate. Ruth nodded. When the standard says so. The standard says visual consistency. The standard says approved materials and approved palette, Ruth replied. If we wanted layout restrictions, we should have written layout restrictions. Paul leaned back in his chair. He had the look of a man imagining all the future meetings that one missing sentence had just created. I almost felt bad for him. Then I remembered he had voted for the Curb Appeal Renewal Initiative, and my sympathy became more appropriately sized. The fourth board member, Carol Wynn, had been quiet until then. Carol was a retired school administrator, which meant she could sit through conflict with the stillness of a person who had once separated seventh graders during lunch duty. She turned to Diane. Did the ARC review the layout attachment? Diane adjusted the papers in front of her. The submission was reviewed. Carol did not blink. By whom? Diane looked at the approval form. The committee review is recorded through the portal. That is not what I asked. The room became very interested in breathing quietly. Diane finally said, I handled the portal review. There it was. Not a confession, not exactly. But the approval stopped being an abstract system and became a decision made by the same person now calling the result impossible. Ruth typed something into her laptop. I did not smile. Smiling at the wrong moment makes people think the goal was humiliation. The goal was a clean record. Humiliation was just standing nearby, hoping to be included. Carol looked at my packet again. The layout was attached? Yes, I said. The color palette was attached? Yes. The contractor quote referenced the colors? Yes. And the approval was issued after that? Yes. Carol looked at Diane. Then I do not see how we fine him for relying on our approval. That sentence did more work than anything I had said. It moved the issue from taste to reliance. Taste is slippery. Reliance has shoes. If a homeowner spends money based on a written approval, a board should be very careful before announcing that the approval did not mean what it said. Otherwise, every approval becomes a suggestion with a fee schedule hiding behind it. Claire squeezed my wrist under the table. Not dramatically, just once. Enough to tell me she had heard it too. Finally, Ruth made a motion. The violation against 118 Briar Glen would be withdrawn because the installation used approved materials and had received ARC approval under the standards in effect at the time. The Architectural Committee would draft a future amendment clarifying whether driveway paver installations must be single color, blended, or otherwise limited by pattern. Any future amendment would apply prospectively. Prospectively. That word did not sparkle. It did not make anyone clap. It did not look good on a thumbnail. But it was the word that saved my driveway. The motion passed 3-1. Diane voted no. That was her right. It was also her third mistake, because Ruth insisted the vote and the reason be entered into the minutes. After the meeting, Edwin asked me for a copy of Marco's paver spec sheet. Linda asked Claire whether the violet looked too bright in direct sun. Claire said, "It depends how much you enjoy Diane noticing your house." I had never been prouder. Diane stopped me near the door. "You understand this will be corrected in the next revision," she said. "Then the next person will know the rule before they spend the money." That is not the point. It was exactly my point. She looked tired then. Not defeated in the theatrical sense. Just tired in the way people look when a tool they have used casually stops fitting their hand. You could have chosen one color. You could have written that down. She did not answer. 2 weeks later, the minutes were posted. The violation was marked withdrawn in the portal. I printed both because habits are how you keep small victories from becoming fog. The withdrawal letter came by email and regular mail, which was generous in the way duplicate evidence is generous. It said the association had completed review of the owner response and determined that the driveway installation would remain approved under the architectural standard in effect at the time of submission. Under the standard in effect. That phrase was doing careful work. It let the board avoid saying Diane was wrong. It let Diane avoid saying I was right. It let everyone move forward without requiring a group therapy session around a conference table. I accepted it. There are times to demand the apology and times to take the document. I took the document. Marco got paid the final installment the next day. That mattered. Contractor payment is one of those loops stories forget because checks are less entertaining than arguments. But I did not want my small war over paperwork to become someone else's cash flow problem. Marco had done the work, answered questions, and attended the hearing without once saying the phrase, "I told you so," which in contractor terms was almost saintly. He sent me the final paid invoice with a note. Good luck with future color choices. I printed that too. Not for the folder. For morale. Edwin and Linda came over the following Saturday with a plate of lemon bars and their own walkway measurements. Linda had marked the uneven stones with blue painter's tape. "We are not doing rainbow," Edwin said immediately. I did not ask. I could feel you thinking it. Linda ignored him and opened the paver packet on our patio table. She had circled sandstone, charcoal, and moss. 3 colors, she said, before they changed the rule. That will look nice. That is what I told him. Edwin sighed. It will look like a walkway that owns a sweater. It will look like a walkway that does not trip me when I bring in groceries, Linda said. That ended the design debate. Their project mattered because it proved the board's decision had not been about one homeowner with too much time and a folder. Other people had aging concrete. Other people had notices. Other people needed to know whether approval meant approval. Ruth called me once after the minutes posted. She did not apologize for Diane. I did not expect her to. Board members rarely apologize for each other unless there is an attorney present and someone has made them. She said, "The revised standard will be clearer. That is good. You understand it may not allow what you installed. For future applications." Yes, for future applications. Then it is doing what a rule is supposed to do. She was quiet for a moment. I wish more owners understood that distinction. I wish more boards did. That was probably too direct, but Ruth gave a small laugh. Fair. The revised standard arrived in June, and for once it was not terrible. It required driveway paver installations to use no more than 3 colors unless a specific pattern was approved in writing. It required the approval form to identify material, pallet, and layout. It required the ARC reviewer to initial each page of attached drawings for projects over a certain cost. That last part felt personal. I admired it anyway. Clear rules are not the enemy. Clear rules let people decide whether to comply, object, or move somewhere with fewer meetings. The problem is not a community saying, "Here is the standard." The problem is a community saying, "We will tell you what the standard was after we see whether we like what you did." That is not governance. That is mood with letterhead. There was one more small consequence. the kind that would not make a title, but mattered more than it looked. The next board packet included a new checklist for architectural approvals. Material, color, layout, contractor requirement, neighbor impact, prior similar approvals. It was not dramatic. It was a table with boxes, which meant half the neighborhood would never read it. But I read it, and I knew exactly which box had been born in my driveway. Prior similar approvals. That was the clubhouse walkway box. That was Ruth's box, probably. It meant the ARC could not pretend each homeowner existed in a vacuum. If the association had approved mixed pavers for itself, it had to at least acknowledge that before punishing an owner for mixed pavers at home. Edwin noticed it too. He sent me a photo of the checklist with one sentence. "Linda says your driveway reproduced." I showed Claire. "That is not how driveways work," she said. "Procedurally it might be. Please never say procedurally in a family text." The checklist also closed a quieter loop for me. I had not wanted the entire neighborhood to install rainbow hardscape. One was enough. Possibly more than enough, depending on the angle of the afternoon sun. What I wanted was for the next person to get a real answer before spending real money. If the answer was no, fine. If the answer was yes, also fine. But it had to be an answer, not a feeling delivered after the invoice. The driveway stayed. The world did not end. Property values did not collapse into a rainbow crater. Airplanes did not divert. Children did not forget math. The mail carrier started using our house as a landmark. "Turn after the colorful driveway," he told someone on the phone one afternoon, and I considered that a public service. Marco got 2 more calls from Fairview residents before the end of the month. Edwin's wife chose a sandstone and charcoal blend for their walkway, which was tasteful enough to make Diane suspicious, but not colorful enough to start a newsletter. Mrs. Patel asked for the name of the blue paver because she wanted a border around her garden path. Claire made me promise not to advise anyone unless asked. I mostly kept that promise. Mostly. The new architectural amendment came out in June. It required driveway paver installations to use no more than 3 colors unless a specific pattern was approved in writing. It was a reasonable rule, actually. Annoying, but clear. Clear rules are not the enemy. Secret rules are. Ruth also added a line requiring approval notices to identify whether color, material, and layout were approved together or separately. That line mattered more than the color limit. It meant the next homeowner would not have to stand in front of a committee while someone tried to separate a driveway into parts after the fact. On the first hard rain after the installation, I stood in the garage and watched water run cleanly down the paver joints and toward the street. No puddle at the low spot, no sheet of water over the old stain. Just a bright, level surface doing the boring job a driveway is supposed to do. Claire came out with 2 mugs of coffee. "It is still a lot," she said. "A professionally installed lot. An approved lot. A prospectively regulated lot." She handed me the mug. "Do not say that to people." I looked at the driveway. Wet pavers are darker than dry ones. The red looked deeper. The blue settled down. The violet stopped shouting and started making its case in a more reasonable tone. Even the charcoal border seemed smug. The old concrete had been cracked, faded, and easy to ignore until Diane decided it was a problem. The new driveway was impossible to ignore. That was the lesson I took from it, though maybe not the lesson Diane wanted me to learn. Sometimes a board will tell you the issue is taste because taste is hard to argue with. One person's improvement is another person's violation. One person's curb appeal is another person's beige little kingdom. So do not argue taste first. Ask for the document. Ask for the material standard. Ask for the approval record. Ask whether the rule says what they claim it says, or whether everyone has just been nodding at a sentence that never made it onto the page. I did not beat the HOA because I had the loudest driveway. The driveway helped, obviously. But the driveway was only loud because the paperwork was quiet and complete. The notice came first. The packet came next. The approval was saved. The contractor wrote the facts down. The common walkway proved the association already lived with mixed pavers when the colors were polite enough. The rainbow just made the contradiction impossible to park behind a phrase like visual harmony. If your HOA tells you to fix something, fix the right thing. But read the standard first, then read the approval, then read the missing word. Because sometimes the most colorful part of a neighborhood is not the driveway. Sometimes it is the question nobody wanted on the record. Can a homeowner rely on the approval in front of him? If the answer is no, the color was never the problem. The problem was permission turning temporary the second someone powerful disliked the result. That is a dangerous way to run a neighborhood, and an expensive way to learn clarity. Sometimes it is the silence after someone realizes they approved it